Hello, my name is Melissa Finley and I'm with the Texas Transportation Institute. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the speed management model, which is part of the roadway safety training program. And we're going to start off today talking about whether or not slower speeds can improve work zone safety. And of course they can in some cases if we think about some common sense principles. First of all, if you're traveling at a slower speed, it gives the driver more time to react to situations that may arise in the work zone. It also reduces your stopping sight distance and provides workers more time to escape if a vehicle was to err and come into the work zone. It also improves the driver's ability to control the vehicle as they traverse through the work zone, as well as to control their vehicle if something was to happen. They start to have a loss control. They can control their vehicle more than if they were traveling at a higher speed. It also may reduce the number of serious accidents. It can reduce just the number of crashes as well as the seriousness of the crash and the injuries themselves. And last but not least, it can reduce wind effects from large trucks that are passing by the work activity. On the screen, you will see that there is a demonstration about speeds. If we click in the red rectangle and choose a speed, let's say 70 miles an hour, it shows you the time for drivers to react, the reduced stopping sight distance, and the time for a driver to escape. You can compare that with other speeds. So let's say in the blue rectangle, we choose 60. So this shows you maybe that your existing speed limit is 70 miles an hour. You're contemplating reducing that speed limit for your work zone to 60 miles an hour, and these are the differences in those characteristics. It also at the bottom of the screen has a chart that shows you your stopping sight distance information. So if we decide we need a reduced speed limit for a work zone, how do we tell the drivers? Well, first of all, we can tell them through regulatory speed limits. Regulatory speed limits are controlled by state laws and standards, so they do vary across the United States. And this informs the person or the driver of the legal road speed limit that you would have to be going through the work zone. Typically, we reduce those speed limits by 10 miles an hour because the National Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices states that this should be the maximum reduction unless engineering judgment shows that you should do a larger reduction. We could also use advisory speed plaques. These are particularly nice to use in locations where your work zone speed limit reduction is only needed for a certain condition, say a lane shift. You can post an advisory speed below your warning sign indicating a lane shift, and it warns drivers of the need to slow down in that particular location. Again, the use of advisory speed plaques are dictated by DOT policies and procedures. The main goal for this when we're trying to tell drivers to slow down is to identify a speed that is safe and reasonable for conditions and then post that for drivers to follow. So when are slower speeds needed in work zones? Well, we want to make sure that we're improving worker and motorist safety. It's a dual purpose. We're not just wanting to improve worker safety at the cost of motorist safety or vice versa. So let's talk about a few instances when work zone reduced speed limits are most needed. First of all, if workers are next to an open lane of travel without positive protection, this would be one case where we really want reduced speed limits to slow drivers down as they're passing by those workers and equipment that may only be separated from them by a barrel or a cone. Also, if we have certain roadway restrictions, such as lane closures or crossovers, these altered geometric conditions can increase the risk for drivers as they're going through the work zone, and so we'd like them to slow down to traverse through those locations as well. However, there are instances when we may have a work zone up that a reduced speed limit is not needed. Okay? If your workers are behind positive protection and there's no other condition on the roadway that increases the risk to motorists, we really don't need a reduced speed limit in that instance. Also, if the work shift is over and the roadway is back to normal, there's no condition that increases the hazard, we do not need to keep that reduced speed limit up. We should remove or cover that reduced speed limit at that time so that the existing posted speed limit is back in effect. Basically, slower or reduced work zone speed limits should only be used if justified by the hazards that exist. They should match the conditions, in other words. So that leads us to the question of, should we keep up our reduced speed limits or advisories at the end of the work shift? Well, basically only if there's still a roadway hazard out there that the work zone is contributing to. Otherwise, if we don't remove that reduced speed limit and the drivers going through do not see an apparent need to slow down, it can lead to problems. First of all, people can disregard the work zone speed limit and other work zone signs, which we would like them to trust so that they know when they see them in the future, they need to obey them. There can also be a greater difference among vehicle speeds, so we have an increase in what we call speed variance. This can actually lead to an increase in crashes. We also sometimes get angry or aggressive drivers because we get negative opinions about why they're having to slow down when there's not an apparent need to go that speed limit. So in order to maintain credibility, we need to cover or remove signs when the work shift is over, if the hazard is gone and there's no need for that reduced speed limit. We need to make sure that we enforce speeds when they are in effect, especially to get drivers to go to slow down so that they follow the reduced work zone speed limit. And we need to use public relations campaigns to make sure that drivers understand why they need to reduce their speed and how to safely traverse through a work zone so that the motorist and the worker safety is increased. So you may be asking yourself, if I have to take down the signs every night or every morning I have to put them up, or maybe even once or twice a week, that can become kind of tedious, okay? What are some options instead of using regular static regulatory speed limit signs that we might be able to use? Well, one is a static speed limit sign with flashing beacons. This looks like a normal static regulatory speed limit sign, except it's located typically on a trailer so that it can be moved around the work zone. And when the flashing beacons are on or illuminated, then that regulatory speed limit is in effect. If the beacons are not illuminated, then that sign is not in effect, and thus you do not have to travel at that reduced speed limit. We also have available portable roll-up speed limit signs, similar to your flexible roll-up speed limit signs you may use at a 1-foot mounting height for very short duration or short-term stationary operations. So these can be used and more easily moved around for those type of operations. Last but not least, we have variable speed limit signs. These can be mounted on permanent poles, or there are some available on trailers that would let you move them around as well. The speeds on these can be dynamically changed to match conditions, or they can just be used to change the speed limit. So if your existing speed limit is 70 and your reduced speed limit is 60, you could just use it that way. It wouldn't dynamically change throughout the day, but then back after you're done, your work is over, you leave for the evening, no other hazard is present, you could increase that speed limit back to 70 miles an hour. Now, one thing to note with all three of these type of innovative devices is there may be some laws in your area that restrict their use. So you need to make sure and check with your state DOT policies as well as state traffic laws to make sure that you can use these types of technologies. So we've talked about reducing the speeds, posting speed limits so that drivers know what they're supposed to be traveling, but do drivers voluntarily slow down in work zones? Well, they do if they perceive a need to do so. Okay, there has to be something out there that they see that makes it apparent to them that they need to reduce their speeds. Believe it or not, drivers do typically slow down, especially next to workers on foot in a closed lane. Also, if they're driving through lane closures and temporary crossovers, and if there's narrow lanes, especially when there's positive protection right adjacent to those narrow lanes. What we have to remember, though, is that voluntary reductions in speed by the driver is typically less than 10 miles an hour and mainly hovers around 5 miles an hour. And when you take into effect that normal operating speeds on a facility are typically 5 to 10 miles an hour over the existing speed limit, we're basically bringing them back into compliance with the posted existing speed limit, not necessarily into compliance if you have reduced the speed limit for the work zone. So if further speed reductions are needed because you have reduced that speed limit for your work zone, what can you do? Well, simply posting speed limit signs at a lower speed will not work. People will not necessarily slow down just because you've posted a regulatory speed limit sign. Active enforcement with police officers is the most effective method. One method is circulating the police officers. This is where they drive around the work zone, maybe occasionally pull someone over, but they're just driving through. There's an appearance of a police officer in the area. This may yield a 2 to 4 mile an hour decrease. If a policeman is stationary, aiming their equipment, targeting, giving out citations, especially in the area right around the work activity, we can see a 3 to 12 mile an hour decrease. Sometimes police officers are also used as traffic controllers to direct traffic. In that instance, we can see a 3 to 14 mile an hour decrease. And also available in some states in the United States is automated speed enforcement. We have seen successful programs in Illinois, Washington, and Maryland, and in those instances, photo enforcement has been seen to reduce speeds by 3 to 6 miles an hour. So what if active enforcement or photo enforcement is not available? Because you can't have those due to budget constraints, time constraints at every work zone. There are some other options that you may use to further reduce speeds. First are driver feedback devices. One type of those is a speed display trailer that shows the speed limit and the speed the vehicle is traveling. Speed display trailers can yield 2 to 10 mile an hour decreases in speeds. But you need to remember that those displays need to be moved around to different locations, and if they're paired with active enforcement, can really impact the reduced speed that you will see at the site. We can also show the speed someone's going on a portable changeable message sign and pair it with a static speed limit sign. So it's very similar to the speed display trailer, except you're just doing it maybe on a trailer or a device that you already have, a portable changeable message sign. These yield typically a 0 to 6 mile an hour decrease. CB information can be used, especially if you're trying to target large trucks in your area. They have been seen to reduce speeds by 0 to 2 miles an hour. Other than driver feedback devices, there are also perceptual methods that can be used to further reduce speeds. One is transverse rumble strips. Rumble strips can be placed in advance of their work zone or near your work zone activity to decrease speeds. Typically, they yield a 2 to 5 mile an hour decrease. Drone radar can be attached to another work zone traffic control device, such as an aero panel, and can emit a radar, and it makes people with radar devices in their car think that there's a police officer in the area. These devices have been shown to decrease speeds by 2 to 3 miles an hour. We can also narrow lanes with channelizing devices or use transverse pavement markings to simulate more narrow lanes. Both of these can decrease speeds by about 0 to 5 miles an hour. Now, speed and speed management techniques are not the only options to improving worker safety in work zones. There are other tools. They include to reduce the work zone exposure through things like nighttime work, also by using different technologies such as automated flagger assistance devices or portable traffic signals, automated equipment to set up traffic control devices, and full roadway closures. We can also improve work zone visibility. Okay? We can do this at night work using appropriate lighting on equipment and in the general work area. We can use larger channelizing devices and warning lights. We can also use reflective apparel, especially at night. We can also improve the path delineation around the work zone. So we can make our traffic control devices, such as our cones and barrels, spaced more closely together to better delineate the path. We can use larger devices, so barrels instead of cones. We can also use mid-lane devices in a lane closure every so often to reiterate that that lane is still closed. On signs in advance of our work zone, especially upstream of lane closures, we can use distances instead of just saying a lane closure ahead. Go ahead and specify how far ahead that is with actual distances, and we can enhance temporary pavement markings. We also need to remember that if we change the pavement markings, we really remove any conflicting pavement markings so that people don't think the old path is still the current path. We can also protect the worker by using intrusion countermeasures and alarms. We can work behind barrier. We can use shadow vehicles with truck-mounted attenuators, flaggers and spotters to help watch out for traffic. We can use longitudinal and lateral buffer spaces to give room for traffic that may enter into the work zone to come to a complete stop before reaching the activity area. And we could also use intrusion alarms that can notify workers if someone has entered back into that work area. What are the best practices for management? You can at least provide one trained work zone supervisor and a temporary traffic control technician on site. Okay? Best practices include keeping logs and records and photos and documentation of the site, documenting any problems and how you address those problems, evaluating and correcting problems such as displaced temporary traffic control devices, skid marks, looking at erratic traffic and trying to figure out why traffic may be having problems. You can provide worker training and toolbox meetings, and then also maybe use internal traffic control plans to help with your project management. Okay, last but not least, we can provide public information. We can provide them with advanced notification of work zones, include maybe alternate route information so that they have other options besides traveling through the work zone. We can do this through highway advisory radio or portable changeable message signs. We can also work with media to get this information out and keep people up to date on what's happening in the work zone. We have motorist work zone information programs for specific projects. And then we can give regularly updated project signs, even located on the roadway, that tell you how the project is progressing. Now I want to show you a quick tool that was developed as part of this guidance. It's a decision tool for speed management. When we click on the Start button, the first question that we ask is, will workers be next to moving traffic without positive protection, or will roadway restrictions present an increased risk to road users? If the answer is no, we really do not need to reduce the speed limits. This will be a situation where you might consider leaving the existing posted speed limit as is. If any of these conditions are going to be in your work zone, you need to consider an appropriate speed limit reduction. Again, these are typically 5 or 10 miles an hour. If more is needed, you can use your engineering judgment in those situations. Next, you need to ask yourself, will there be times during which the worker or roadway restrictions that warranted the speed limit reduction is not present? Okay? If the answer is yes, there are going to be times when those things are not on the roadway, then you need to consider implementing a reduced speed limit management strategy. You need to cover or remove your signs when they're not applicable to conditions, or you may try out one of the new technologies I discussed earlier. If for some reason there's conditions that will be left up 24 hours a day, say 7 days a week, then you do not need to worry about covering or removing your signs. Your signs will need to remain in place because those conditions will remain in place. So then next you need to ask yourself, are drivers expected to voluntarily slow down within 5 miles an hour of the work zone speed limit? If your answer is no, then you need to consider some speed reduction strategies. We talked about law enforcement, driver feedback devices, and perceptual methods. If you believe drivers will slow down and comply with your reduced work zone speed limit, you do not need to implement any of these strategies. The last question you should ask is, are the speed reduction strategies expected to reduce speeds within 5 miles an hour of the work zone speed limit? So you have a voluntary reduction by your driver, and then you have these supplemental speed reduction strategies. Those both, will they reduce the speed of drivers to comply with your work zone speed limit? If the answer is no, you probably need to reconsider your speed reduction magnitude, because no matter what you post on the sign, drivers are not going to reduce their speeds to be in compliance with your speed limit. It's not matching conditions. So then, if it is going to comply and you think you're going to achieve the speed limit reduction needed, then you would go through and implement the speed reduction strategies. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session and will watch other sessions as part of this program.